Hi, I'm Louise Messier, nutritional therapist, and I'm working with Nurture Me Day Nursery to provide some menu support and to offer nutritional guidance for the early years. This video series is looking at the specific nutritional considerations for autistic populations. And whilst many of these issues may be true across the whole spectrum of children, there are certain issues that may be more exacerbated within children within autistic populations. And it's really just things to be aware of, things to consider, things to monitor, and things that may explain, particularly around food intake, why things may be more difficult or more emotional around food, and to try to look at ways of monitoring those things to make sure that children within autistic populations are getting the maximum nutritional intake that they can for their development. So in this video, we are looking at blood sugar regulation. And blood sugar regulation is something that is really important for children and us grown-ups. It's really important for our mood regulation and our emotional regulation. So when children are more stressed and emotional and anxious, it's really important that blood sugar regulation is something that's kept as stable as possible, because dips and ups and downs with it will certainly cause the same ups and downs with moods and stress levels. So it's really important to try to recognize the impact of that blood sugar roller coaster on the stress hormone cortisol, and also the feelings of fear and anxiety that is often a bit more prevalent within children within autistic populations. But it's just the same for us grown-ups, and it's just the same for all children. Stable blood sugar helps us to have more stable mood regulation. So children will often favor sugary foods. Whilst that's, true across the spectrum, it's perhaps a bit more prevalent when we have a really limited range of foods that we can actually get children to eat. So whilst sugary foods may be deemed as safe foods in terms of we know that children can eat them, they're obviously not boosting the nutritional intake in any way, shape or form. So when we can, if we can, try not to have sugary foods within that safe foods. But I am completely aware that sometimes it is a case that we just need to get the child to actually eat something. And if it becomes a safe food, then once it's a safe food, it's a safe food. So it could be that they are within that range of safe foods, but we need to understand the biological and emotion connections with sugary foods and what kind of deeper impact they are having on that mood. So what's the biology of sugar? So when we eat foods that are high in sugar, there's often a mix with them that they're also high in fat, possibly salt, and also refined carbohydrates. So that combination of food, it's never normally just sugar, it's normally a combination of food. So they're quite visually pleasing, which is why they become a safe food, because they are often better received. And they're kind of something that we know, if we know that at least in terms of energy intake, they've at least had something. They're visually pleasing. So they look tempting. They don't look like something is going to be as daunting as certain foods can. If we're looking at food presentation, they can just look a bit more appealing. They're highly palatable, and they're designed to be highly palatable. So they are designed to be really easy to eat. And that could be something, if we have low muscle tone or if we have trouble chewing, then the very texture of these foods is much easier for us to actually cope with than, say, a carrot or something, because actually it's designed to almost melt in the mouth. These sort of sugary, highly processed foods are designed to be what's referred to as highly palatable, which is something that makes us want it, but also eat it really easily, so that we're not consuming too much energy when we eat it. It's really easy to eat. It dissolves in the mouth, and it's really easy for us to do that. But they are empty calories. There is no nutritional benefit. There is no nutrients that are building anything biologically within the child when they eat these foods. And in terms of the biology, they do produce a dopamine response. So they are activating the pleasure and reward center of the brain, which is linking that food with pleasure. So sugar activates the pleasure and reward center of the brain, so that when we eat something sugary, we release dopamine. When we get that temporary pleasure response, we kind of feel maybe a bit happier, maybe a bit more lively. We could feel, a bit more lifted because we've had that food. But that center of the brain is also the center of the brain which is linked with habits and repetitive behaviors and even addictions. So there's a lot of scientific research one way or the other on whether sugary foods are addictive. And I'm not going to say whether they are. You may find them addictive, and I've worked in nutrition for many, many years, and many people do find them addictive, but there is no scientific thing that says sugar is addictive. There is no thing that actually says that. There's very much hit and miss either way in terms of scientific reports. But because of the response in the body and the pleasure and response center of the brain being the same part of the brain that's linked to repetitive and addictive behaviors, it is likely that it could cause you to become, if not addicted, then habitually led towards these foods. Because once the initial hit's worn off, because the food wasn't filling, wasn't satisfying, didn't really provide a nutritional hit, your blood sugar comes back down, you then want some more food because you haven't been satisfied, and you could want more of that food, so you could crave more of the same. But it's, it's just something to be mindful of in terms of their response. It's a biological response. So if a child is kind of demanding more, it's not that they are, I don't like to use the phrase misbehaving, but often misbehaving is used when a child is in a supermarket and demanding something that they've seen. It's a biological response. Their body is responding to what they think is a biological need to have that item of food. So in terms of the dopamine response, the more you eat sugary foods, you don't get the same hit of dopamine. So this is, if you've ever found that you have been in a situation where you've had a biscuit and then haven't noticed yourself reaching for the second or even the third, and then you've kind of eaten them without realizing, that's because that one biscuit you have in the first instance will give you a dopamine hit. But then the second time, you don't get the same hit from the one biscuit. So you may find that you want 2 biscuits. You may even find that you want 3 biscuits. So each time you need to eat more and more sugar to get the same dopamine response, which is where the sort of habitual behaviors start to come in with sugary foods, because we're never satisfied from what we've had. We're always left wanting more. So in terms of the blood sugar crest, these sugary foods are simple. That's not me being derogatory to them. They're referred to, well, I would be, but anyway, they're referred to as a simple carbohydrate. So they are a quick hit of energy, a quick hit of blood sugar, a quick hit of glucose into the bloodstream, which does cause the energy to be released really quickly in the bloodstream. But any quick release also causes a quick spike, because what we have the opposite of in terms of if we had a complex food, it would be released gradually. It would be like, here's a bit longer, here's a bit longer, here's another bit. So we never have the initial whoa, but we also never have the crash afterwards. So we need to try as much as possible to recognize the blood sugar roller coaster. And again, in terms of monitoring, watch the food, label the food when the child eats it, and then monitor the behavior. Does it cause this emotional high and then emotional low? And just sort of monitor for patterns of behavior with that. Because when our blood sugar drops, our mood generally drops too. And we suddenly feel really hungry. And when we feel hungry, we can often feel really sort of hangry, I think is the term now. But we can feel really irritable and lethargic, and we can't concentrate, and we just feel a bit really. And again, this is really hard to articulate for anybody, but it's really hard for a child to articulate. So they've not had any real energy from the food, but they say they can feel really grumpy again very soon, that they want something, but they'll want more of the same. They won't necessarily want the real food that you may try to offer them. So being on a blood sugar roller coaster is causing our hormones and our emotions to do the same thing. So there are lots of food that promote natural feelings of being calm and content. And when we feel calm and content, we're kind of in a more stable place with our emotions, and that's helping our kind of ability to cope with other things. When our emotions are up and down on the blood sugar roller coaster, our stress response is heightened, so our cortisol response is heightened, and things that would not normally cause a big traumatic issue can cause a big traumatic issue. So it could be that something really minor and innocuous would suddenly feel like something really, 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 really bad is going on. And so it can really help to try to monitor the blood sugar roller coaster and recognize the link with the emotional roller coaster as well. Because while some foods promote that feeling of calm and content, sugary foods have the opposite effect of doing that. So they have the opposite effect, whatever the opposite of calm and content is. That's what sugary foods would be creating within the body. So we know that stress and anxiety is often heightened within autistic populations. So just imagine the stress and anxiety that you might feel when you feel hungry, and then times that by 3 or 4 times, and imagine how that might feel for the child to be coping with that biologically. And remember the impact that drop in blood sugar can have on emotion and stress levels. And that desire and demand for these food is biologically driven. So to work with and not against them, we can't just say no to a child who has these foods as a safe food, because there's a biological response to desire the food that has already been created, and a food connection that's already been created. So we can't just say no, because that would be very traumatic. But we do need to try to work alongside the child to recognize that this is nutritionally devoid and it's having this impact on mood and emotions. What can we do to not exclude this food, but to try and incorporate it within proper food that is going to try and balance that emotional regulation and balance that blood sugar roller coaster, which is basically encouraging foods that support a child's emotional well-being and, of course, their physical health and development as well. So this one was blood sugar regulation, a whistle-stop tour of blood sugar regulation. The other videos within the series are gastrointestinal issues, new tastes, and food routines and sensory issues. So I'm Louise Messier, nutritional therapist working with Nurture Me Day Nursery, and I hope to see you again in a video soon.